This is TWiT.
Well, and so we've got kind of the collection here. Obviously, this is the PS VR, the PlayStation VR, and the controller. I can't remember what they call this specifically.
That's PlayStation Move Wand.
Move Wand.
Which is actually came out with the PlayStation 3, and they brought it back for this, for the PlayStation 4.
They were like, wait a minute, that actually would come in really handy for VR.
Right.
Here we have the Oculus Rift, of course, and the PlayStation Touch, which I really like the controller, the PlayStation Touch.
Oculus Touch.
Or sorry.
I would be an interesting cross-branding.
Hey, there we go. The Oculus Touch, though. I remember when I first played with this, like the finger tracking and everything is just really neat.
Because it does have a little bit of sensing there for all fingers, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we've got over here the HTC Vive. This is the Vive Pro, correct? So the HTC Vive Pro.
The HTC Vive Pro is interesting. It has currently the same exact wand controller as the original Vive, but the display is about 78% more pixels. So with 78% more pixels, you need a little bit of a better computer sometimes to get that image going, but boy is the effect amazing when your computer is fast enough. And recently we've got the RTX 2080 Ti, which is a $1,200 graphics card, but it'll play really nicely with that Vive Pro.
Very nice. And then finally, this is the Lenovo, what is this? This is the Lenovo, I want to get the model quite right. Well, Windows Mixed Reality headset. And this actually has true inside-out tracking, right? Like you don't need an cameras set up in your room. So there's a lot going on inside of the headsets in Windows Mixed Reality.
Well, let's talk about the sensing, how they start. And we're going to go into building a room later. But the basics of it is that different sets work with different sort of standing and sitting. Which one of these do you want to start with first to sort of break down how that kind of works?
Maybe let's start off with the PlayStation VR because I think that's kind of like low barrier to entry. Would you say of the four of these? I would say so.
For the four of these, because we're in the high-end VR space, and we're going to talk about some lower-end stuff later, but PlayStation VR requires a PlayStation 4 console, either the normal one or the Pro. So that'll run you $250 to $400 for a console. Then you're buying this kit, which includes sometimes one of these wands, sometimes the PlayStation Eye camera. And the idea is, this is a design mostly for a sit-down experience, although you can stand, but it's a camera that's looking directly at you. And that means sitting down or standing is more ideal than actually getting up and walking around. There's certain controllers, including not only just this wand here, but there's also the PlayStation Aim controller, which is a gun-shaped, it's like a shotgun shape. It has this sort of barrel action so that you've got actually joysticks on each of the thumbs so that you can manage moving and inventory and things like that while you're in a virtual world. It also works with just the plain old DualShock controller. There's an incredible game in which, in VR, you see your hands trapped in a box. So as you hold the controller, the effect with the headset on is as if your hands are actually trapped in the box, even though you're just holding a controller. It's a real trip. So all you need is that game system and that camera and this headset, and you sit down. You can stand up in a pinch, but sitting down is pretty ideal for PlayStation VR. But there's already a wide array of games. We've got Elder Scrolls from Bethesda. They have Elder Scrolls 5 Skyrim in VR on PlayStation VR. Doom has a VR version. I believe that's also on PlayStation VR.
The Fallout? Fallout VR,
Fallout, that's on a different, that's on PC.
Oh, okay.
But Gran Turismo has a VR version. There's a game called Moss that's really cute. There's a lot of software, not all of the games, but a lot of the cute ones. Rick and Morty has a VR game that's on PlayStation VR. So there's a pretty solid selection, and Sony's been pumping stuff out. They've got a game called Firewall 0 Hour, I want to say that's the right name, that just came out as we're talking about this, which is 4-on-4 tactical combat. You have it has a default microphone in the earplugs that come with it. So you'll chat with your teammates. It's exclusive to PSVR, and it's got this really awesome feel to it, and there are people playing it. It's not a ghost town, so that's a really cool experience.
Right on. Okay, so, and I know, by the way, I played, what was it, Arkham, Batman Arkham?
Batman Arkham VR, yeah.
Arkham VR, and there's a moment in there where you step in front of a mirror and you see, you know, yourself as Batman looking back at you. And even though like the resolution, I felt like the resolution is a little lower on the PlayStation VR, and maybe the field of view isn't quite so great, but there was something about that moment in that game, looking in the mirror, that at that moment I had like this transformative experience of suddenly not feeling like I was me and feeling like I was Batman.
Did you then whisper, did you whisper, I'm Batman?
Of course, because that's what you do. But anyways, it was really cool.
Nice.
And so for, you know, sure, it has its faults. I think the low resolution is the thing that I would complain the most about.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's
and you don't
still
get
transformative.
You don't get a higher resolution by plugging it into a different system. You may get a little bit of extra boost when you're on PS4 Pro, but you're still ultimately dealing with the limitations.
Yeah.
So having PS4 Pro will add some super sampling where like the source files are a little bit sharper, but it's still going through some of this blur. So out of all of these, this may be the blurriest one, but it's also tends to be the most reasonably priced one, often is bundled with other games.
Right, yeah, I was definitely seeing
and it's comfortable. These all come on, and we may put these on later, but this one slides on and off. I could just put it on right now.
Yeah, go ahead and put it on right now.
So the way, and we'll see how terribly this goes, because I haven't actually done this yet. But the idea is that it just, there, I'm in, I'm on. I'm able to grab this button down here, slide it in and out. That makes a lot of room for glasses at the furthest distance.
Oh, okay.
And then there's a click dial here that I can tighten, or I can just press it to let go, and boom, out.
Very nice.
There we go.
Very nice. All right, PSVR. Okay. What is the next step here? Would it be the Oculus?
I say we talk Oculus.
Oculus Rift. All right.
Oculus Rift. Let's just start with me putting that on, since we're on the putting on phase. This one, you just put on like a baseball cap, is what they say. And you've got
all so different.
This one has a little bit of strap attachment.
Yeah.
But to tighten it up. But you know, there I am. It has earbuds already in there, so or just attached. This by default. You can
kind of flip out when you don't need them.
When you're like, hey, what? What? Real life?
Right.
And you can kind of, it's got this little patch that you can see under your nose. This does as well. But if you need to like look down and go, oh, there's like, if you want to look at your phone, you can totally do that. Hold on while I de-strap and get out.
All right.
But Oculus has a different sensing protocol. It takes webcams, but multiple webcams. It'll do as few as 1 if you just want to sit down and play, or as many as 3 if you want to stand up and move around a room. And you're going to need at least 2 of the cameras if you're going to use the Oculus Touch controller. There's 2 of them normally, you only have 1, but they each have their own joystick, their own couple of buttons, and 2 different triggers. And as we were hinting at earlier, it also can sense whether your finger is touching or out. So you can do a pointing gesture, you can get your fingers closed and do a fist bump. It'll recognize these little, this finger, and this finger. And
that really helps on immersion, I have to say. It sounds like a little thing, but man, I think the game is called I Expect You to Die, and there's a point in there where you have to, you know, push a button, like something as simple as like pushing a button on a wall in order to open the door. And just going out there and pushing and pulling the trigger is one thing, but actually in that game, you have to go out there, put your finger out, and then push forward. And I mean, it just, you know, all those little touches when you're talking about virtual reality really pull you into that experience. And the end game, the goal, I imagine, for everyone that makes these experiences is to make you forget about reality and trick your brain into thinking that this is reality. That's why they call it virtual reality. And little touches like that really help.
Now, Oculus Touch came later. That was an add-on that came later. And I think the best things about Oculus Touch came because it had more time to cook in the oven. So those sort of finger gestures are unique to that. You don't get that with any of these other platforms. So I think that's a really nice move they did on their part. That sort of fractured the opening audience, but people could just buy it as an add-on, and they did because there were games that came out for it. Then we move on to the HTC Vive. This is the Vive Pro and the Vive are both very similar. This has a better fit all in all because it's got this crazy headset thing. Now, normally with the original Vive, it's just kind of frozen as a flat thing. It's a real pain to put on. But this one, you can actually flip up like this, stick it to your face like so, then pull the back down.
Oh, okay.
And that actually went pretty smoothly. This is not as smooth when you're on the normal Vive. It can be a way bigger pain in the butt, but this has an easy click in for in and out. It also has its own earbuds that are attached, and there you are. Now, this comes with a simpler controller, but this was the first to have a controller that would be sensed in space, meaning you move your hand around and your hand would appear in the game in the same spot. And Oculus Touch sort of came later to that. So the limitations as a result, you don't have this sort of comfortable
articulation.
This sort of fits like a glove. as you see right here. My hand is just in. I can tie this guy on in a pinch. I'm not going to do that. But this I have to always actively hold.
Yep.
And that just adds this extra little bit. And these little...
Not to mention it's twice the size. That thing's gigantic compared to this.
Right. And instead of getting a joystick, you get this sort of touchpad, which depending on the app can be a cool way to interact with things. But often it's not very natural.
Yeah.
Whereas this, at least, because this, if you want to pretend to be running forward, this feels like, oh, I'm running forward, I'm letting go. But you don't get that sort of natural release point. You also have these bumper buttons that are on the side. In action, they're a real pain to actually click down. But the trigger is fine. If you want to pretend it's a gun, then that gun feeling is totally there. But it's bulky. This whole thing right here, this whole giant array is designed to be sensed whatever part of a room you're standing in. Because the Vive promise has always been that you can walk around a giant room. And I think one of the payoffs, or the drawbacks, pardon me, from the early days was that it was this giant bulky thing. At the time, this seemed, oh my God, that's revolutionary. Now it just looks like a real big donut-y thing, yeah.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah. It really does. But I mean, the Vive was ahead of its time. Talk a little bit about kind of what you have on the front of the Vive here. Like if you look at the front of the Oculus Rift, you're not getting any of these sensors, but you do on the Vive.
The original Vive shipped with one front-facing webcam. And for the Vive Pro, they decided to double that with 2 front-facing webcams. And the reason you don't see that on other headsets is because nobody's really used this in any apps yet. You're not getting people really integrating this webcam view. I mean, I've been using the Vive 2.5 years now, and I haven't played with one experience where I flipped on that webcam and saw my real life appear in a way that was useful. When you're in the Vive, you're actually just, before you really strap in, you're doing a setup process where you tell the system, hey, this is how big my room is. This is where my TV is. This is where my cat might be. And then the system, when you're in VR, will say, don't go that far. They will put up little virtual walls to tell you how far to go. I mean, it doesn't actually see your cat. That's the catch.
That's too bad.
Apologies, cat owners.
All right. So, and then finally, we have this, which is just one example. This is the Lenovo Windows Mixed Reality headset. And I played around. I can't remember if it was the Lenovo headset, but they're all relatively different. I mean, that's the thing. This is Windows world. So you've got a bunch of different manufacturers making their own style of headsets. So there's a lot of options here. But here again, you do have the cameras.
But those cameras are different because you had talked about it. This one has its own, it tracks itself. That wherever you are, it will know what is near you without requiring that you do a setup. You don't need to set up a webcam. You don't have to set up any sensors around the room. That just sees what's near you, and it also recognizes the controller. Now, this controller is very similar to the Oculus Touch, but it doesn't have all the finger sensing. But the cool thing it has is this little light array. So when it's powered on, Jason right here, when he has the set in, those cameras are looking for these dots.
Oh, okay.
So that's how it knows where your hand is, so you don't have to get a webcam out or anything like that. And that's probably, I mean, you look like you're from the future, which is fun. You look like you're in Tron. It has, you'll see on the side of his head, on his right side, there's this little dongle right here where you can plug in your own headphones.
Oh, right.
Some of the Windows headsets come with those, some don't. What's nice is that these Windows Mixed Reality headsets work pretty much smoothly with anything in Steam VR and even with some Oculus games. But it's not really adding anything to the formula as much as it's flattening it, saying, okay, we've got this established sense of how sit-down VR works, and here's other people making it cheaper or perhaps with sharper resolution screens. It's you know, at least they've standardized that controller to have, you know, things that are like Oculus Touch, the joysticks and the buttons.
Well, I think one thing that I really liked about Windows Mixed Reality when I played around with it, I think I took a system home for a week and messed around with it in my living room, was that idea that you don't need these kind of tracking cameras around. There's a little bit of a setup process where you put it on and you like walk around the boundaries of your room to kind of draw a virtualized map of the room you actually have. And then when you're within the experience, as you, and of course I was playing super hot because there for a while that was my obsession in VR. When you reach near those boundaries or you get close to them, you see this kind of outline of a wall that gets close to you. So you know that, oh no, on the other side of that wall is a lamp. ramp. I better not go there. You know, and you get that visual readout, and it didn't really require anything other than the headset itself and a little bit of pre-configuration time.
Right. So ultimately, we're in sit-down territory generally with PlayStation VR, with a little bit of standing. You have a little more leeway to get up and move around with your mixed reality and Oculus Touch, and then you've got full-on room scale in terms of walking around a predefined space most neatly and best tracked with the Vive. This is the best. If you want to be sure that your hands and head are perfectly tracked, this is the one. Because as cool as it is to have these front-facing sensors on the mixed reality, sometimes they don't see what's behind you and things like that.
Yeah.
And losing any of that immersion can break certain games just enough where it's like, I should have gotten the Vive or things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.